Hello, everyone. I'm Ann Haddad, Museum Historian at the Merchant's House. Welcome to our series, Women Who Dared, 19th Century American Women Writers. For background on the theme and the purpose of this series, please stay tuned after the story. Today's story is The Little Mendicants by Catherine Maria Sedgwick, which first appeared in the Columbian Ladies and Gentlemen's magazine in April of 1846. Sedgwick, born in 1789 in Massachusetts, achieved tremendous success with her historical romance novels. She was the country's first best-selling female author. She never married and encouraged women to be independent and to turn away from marriage if it was merely to conform to expectations or solely for financial gain. In her very insightful stories, she challenged the prevalent women's stereotypes and revealed the complexities of navigating a society where prejudice against certain groups, including the Irish immigrant, was expected among members of the elite class. Sedgwick died in 1867. And I want to offer a disclaimer. The language of this story will seem quite harsh to our sensitive ears. But remember, it was written in 1846 when the Great Famine was sending millions of Irish immigrants to our shores, and prejudice against the Irish was rampant. We all have our pet charities. Our next door neighbor, Mrs. Devon, is one of the board of managers of 3 charitable societies, and she fulfills her duty critically to all. They are, I believe, the only societies in the city that do not include within the circuit of their charities one of the great pauper class, the Irish. One of them is for the relief of respectable indigent females. Not one of these is ever, by any chance, Mrs. Devon says, an Irish woman. Another is for the orphan colored children. The others I do not now remember, but I am sure it includes none of these aliens from Mrs. Devon's household of faith. I dropped in last week to pay our neighbor a morning visit. I saw she was rather excited, and after some general observations, she asked me rather abruptly if I approved of giving to street beggars. Oh, no, certainly not, I said very boldly, hoping in my secret heart she would not go into particulars. Oh, she said, I thought perhaps you did. Oh, no, Mrs. Devon. And I repeated very glibly all the stock sayings of political economists which I had gathered from books and lectures against almsgiving. Mrs. Devon heard me through and then rather let down my vanity by saying, I do not get my principles from books or men. I don't think they know anything about such matters. I have my own principles, and I have seen enough of the bad effects of giving out of the door never to do it. There is a drove of Irish going up and down the street, and we shall never get rid of them till all the neighborhood agree uniformly to refuse them. They are a wretched set of people. Very wretched, I said modestly. Yes, and very undeserving, resumed Mrs. Devon, and so dirty and so stout and so healthy. Well, there is but one poor woman, I ventured to say, who has been in the habit all winter of going up our street, who is anything but stout and healthy. Oh, yes, I know, replied Mrs. Devon in the tone of a retort. I have observed her. She always has a boy and a girl with her that ought to be in the house of refuge. Yes, she skulks behind our steps while your cook fills her boy's basket. Thus caught in the fact by my sharp-sighted neighbor, I had to confess that this woman's little girl was a pet of our children, and that being younger than the youngest among them, when she dropped down into the area of a biting winter's morning, they felt the contrast so strongly between her condition and theirs, sitting as they were, warmly clad and well served round their smoked breakfast, that it was difficult to restrain their compassion by any general laws, and that they even went so far sometimes as to smuggle a well-buttered hot cake from their plates into her basket. "But do you know," asked Mrs. Devon, apparently quite shocked, "do you know what a liar that girl is? She had the hardihood to tell me, and she is fatter than any of my children ever were, that she never had eaten but twice in her life." I fear Mrs. Devon perceived the smile lurking at the corners of my mouth as I confessed the children had told me that that was little Mag Mahoney's standing statement. A joke is perennial with children. No use wears it out. And the truth is that this daily repetition of this little romance of Mag is infinitely diverting to our young people. And when their elders have sometimes had the grace to rebuke them for encouraging her to repeat it, they say, "Oh, but she is so young and so pretty and fat and droll." And they tell her to say it. Well, it is not her fault. "Well," said Mrs. Devon, her manner and tone conveying much more than her words, "I did not imagine you knew she told this lie. She never had the opportunity to tell it more than once at my door. It's no wonder the Irish are such finished liars when they begin so early. They lie and they steal and they are horrid wretches." Truth is one of the cardinal virtues that seems particularly adverse to the imaginative constitution of the Irish. On that head, I could not gainsay my neighbor, but I ventured modestly to suggest that I had found them particularly honest. "Honest?" echoed Mrs. Devon. "Why, it was but yesterday morning that these same Mahoneys came up this street. And do you know, the mother always keeps ahead of the children. That is one of their little contrivances, so that people may think that these little brutes are driven forth by want alone. They don't take me in. My waiter had a chamber candlestick in his hand, not silver, but the best of Sheffield plate. I have had the pair ever since I kept house." The doorbell rung, and he set it down on the table in the lower entry. Our area door happened to be open. David saw the little Mahoneys at your window, but he did not see the mother anywhere. And when he went downstairs, the candlestick was gone. And I make no doubt that while your children were giving out their hotcakes to hers, the mother slipped in and took my candlestick. Mrs. Devon's manner made me feel for the moment as if our poor children were confederates of the Mahoneys, and impressing my sympathy almost in a tone of contrition, I begged to see the mate of the stolen candlestick and offered to go myself to the Mahoneys' little cabin and attempt to recover the stolen goods. This softened Mrs. Devon. She evidently looked upon it as a concession on my part to the truth. The candlestick was produced, a little the worse for use, as 30 years' wear, even on Sheffield plate, and with the best of housewifery, will show. However, the value of the article had nothing to do with the sin of the theft. And such was my faith in the Mahonies, and such, I must confess, the friendly relations of our family with them, that I felt confident of being able to recover the candlestick if they had stolen it. And in truth, I thought the evidence was rather against it. In the course of the morning, I went to the Mahonies. I had been there before. They live in a little isolated cabin on a vacant lot far up the 6th Avenue. It was a soft morning in February. The door stood ajar, and around it, ducks and hens were picking up crumbs that argued an abundant income from the alms basket. Adjoining the house, there was a pen of broken boards where another pensioner on the little mendicant's foragings was thriving and grunting. I said the door was ajar. I lingered there for a moment to observe and listen. Alas, we involuntarily cast the poor beyond the pale of our good breeding. There were 2 rooms within the house, one just large enough to contain a bed, the other some 12 feet square, where all the family offices and observances were performed. And surely the household gods never looked down on a scene of greater confusion and filth, good humor blended with affection, and flowers growing out of this dunghill and nourished by the light and dews and favor of heaven. The floor apparently had never seen water, except it had been spilled there. Coals collected from the siftings in the street were deposited in a scattering heap by a battered, smoking stove, and some kindlings in dangerous proximity were on the other side of it. The mother sat by a table on the only available chair in the room. A board was put across 2 others and thus furnished a seat for our friends Ned and Mag, who, with a little half-clothed urchin between them, occupied it. Another child, halfway under the table, playing with a full litter of pups. Oh, animal life throve at the Mahonies, outdoors and in. No wonder the little mendicants were early and late at rich men's doors to supply all the hungry mouths at home. Children, pigs, fowls, dogs, and all. Among the consumers, I have not included a canary that hung over the table and, stimulated by the clatter of the children, sang as sweetly as if he had been in the loveliest bower of his own sunny land. While I still occupied my post of observation, Ned shook up and shook out, for the feathers floated in every direction, a caseless pillow and put it behind his mother's back. "There, mammy," he said, "rest your bones agin it. It will cure the ache of 'em." "God bless ye, Neddy, it does help a bit." "Ach, mammy dear, and so it will. And ye'll be well again quite entirely if yous be after eating like Maggie and me. Hold the dish here a bit, Mag." Mag brought a deep earthen dish with a piece notched out of the edge here and there, and Ned, with the half of a broken plate, scooped from a stewing cauldron an indescribable mess. It was made of motley contents of the alms baskets: fish, flesh, and fowl, puddings, tarts, pies, all mixed together, and all together making not an unsavory salmagundi, judging from the steam that reached my olfactory nerves. "There, mammy, there," said Ned, fishing up a whole egg. "Eat that first, just. William Ald's cook in the 5th Avenue gave it to me for you. The Almighty bless his white airs. She said it was good for you. It was good for you. And Pat McGraw says if you eat plenty of them, it'll make your lungs grow again. Och, he exclaimed, giving the mess another stir. Here's a bit of plum pudding that Miss, naming our youngest, gave me. The Blessed Virgin watch over her, the little darling. Just be after eating it, Mammy. It'll make your stomach feel so good and full. And oh, here's the turkey wing the little lady with the big black eyes gave Maggie from her own plate. The saints love her. The one that's always after making Mag say she's ate it but twice in her life. That would be our mischievous Nell. Eat it, Mammy dear. It will put strength into your legs again. Nah, Nettie, nah. They get weaker and weaker every day. I'm after thinking they'll never take me out with you again. Nah, Mammy dear, there's nobody would dare say that to me but yourself. We'll have many a fair run together yet. Eat, Mammy, eat. Pat McGruff says plenty of good food will cure everything in life. And it's plenty you'll have. And the pigs and the pups too, while there's Mag and I collect things for yous. I made my entry at this point, and I believe a smile was lurking on my lips, for Mrs. Mahoney looked as if she thought I had the feeling of having detected her. And Ned snatched up the dish from impulse to hide it, and over it went on the puppies and child under the table, who with their snatching and lickings soon disposed of more than their fair share of the fodder. Sure, said poor Mrs. Mahoney apologetically, and it is not every day we've had such plenty. And it's the doctor's orders from the infirmary, interposed Ned. That your mother should have plenty to eat, Ned? That's just it, indeed, said the ready fellow, reassured by my manner. And when I went on to say that I was only sorry poor Mrs. Mahoney's appetite was not as good as her food, she said, indeed, Mom, it is not often we're having such a dinner as this. It matters not for me, but the children and the pups. I keep them for the poor fatherless children, just for a little diversion like. And the geese and the hens, it's the eggs brings us a few shillings. And the pigs, was not it the pigs, was all my poor husband left to his fatherless children? All would starve together but for yeast and the like of ye, madam. But indeed, there's days when we look starvation in the face. I saw that Mrs. Mahoney felt it necessary to convince me that the sumptuous repast I had witnessed was accidental. And I was mortified, as I have often been, to perceive that the poor regard the rich as looking on their accidental plenty, their genial hours, their few social activities, with a jealous and condemning eye. Though I am very well aware that it was inexcusable in Mrs. Mahoney to permit her children to beg for the subsistence of her family and the support of her livestock, and although I know it is a vice to indulge in charities whereby children are tempted to an idle and corrupting mode of life, yet I must confess that this dirty little Ned, with his strong filial devotion triumphing over all the deteriorations of his condition, the anxious little mother, laughing little Mag, feeding the baby and fondling it, and the boy playing with the pups, he enjoying existence much as they did in its freedom from thought and pain, although made me for the moment forget my stern principles in my sympathy with the scene. And when I heard these little mendicants throwing back blessings on all who had blessed them, I felt that there is no unmitigated evil, that on the darkest channels of human life, light falls from heaven. That is a truth, but not a truth to make us idle or inactive. For if through all the natural evils of life and the accumulated wrongs of our social condition, a providential care is visible, surely man should become an earthly providence to the outcast children. But I have forgotten my errand to Mrs. Mahoney, which, though I aimed at as much delicacy as the nature of the cause permitted, was rather discordant with my previous manifestations. Mrs. Mahoney stoutly denied knowing anything of my neighbor's candlestick, and so fervently thanked the Almighty that in her lowest poverty, even when her husband lay starving with cold and dying at home, she had never touched what was not her own, and so solemnly appealed to him who was soon to judge her, that I was convinced of her innocence and made her quite easy by the appearance that I was so. From that, she rapidly declined, and though she was supplied with what my little friend Ned called genteel food, her appetite never returned. When she died, the expenses of the funeral were provided for by a few friends of the children, and I went with one of them to witness the ceremonies of the occasion. The house was filled and surrounded by Mrs. Mahoney's Catholic friends. They made their way for us to enter the door. The fowls were picking up the crumbs around the step just as on the first day I was there. The dogs were thrust outside and were amusing some idle boys. The little canary, as if in sympathy with the subdued tone within, was mute on his perch. The coffin containing the body was in the inner room, and the doorway being filled up, I did not at first see it. The three younger children, including Maggie, were sitting on the laps of different friends, Maggie recognizing each newcomer with a cordial nod, and the little ones sufficiently entertained with looking round and devouring huge bits of cake. My eye sought in vain my little friend Ned. The wave receded from the doorway, and I saw the end of the coffin and a crucifix standing on it, that most thrilling symbol around which the thoughts of desertion and sympathy, of sin and pardon, of death and eternal life cluster, the symbol that brings down the monarch to the level of the poor, that raises the poor above all earthly thrones. Beside the crucifix was a lighted candle, the token, I believe, to the pious Catholic, of the undying spirit. I heard loud sobs, and I felt sure that they must proceed from poor little Ned. I pressed toward the door, and there I recognized him, or rather, a pair of unwashed legs and ragged shoes that I knew belonged to him. His head was plunged into the coffin where he was laying his cheek to his mother's, kissing her, and with the passion of his race, vehemently lamenting her. Poor Ned's legs were too much for my friends or mine. We exchanged smiles that soon, however, gave place to the more seeming tribute of tears, for the boy's wailing was heartbreaking. "It's not I that will be after living in the world without you, Mammy," he said. "Who now will be always the same to me, whether I'm bad or good? Ah, Mammy, you never spoke the cross word to me, and you'll never speak again. Never, never, Mammy, never." I lifted the child out of the coffin and tried to comfort him. After a while, I succeeded, for poor Ned's grief was like the grief of other children, proverbially transient as April clouds. The hearse did not come at the promised time, and my friend and I, after waiting a full half hour, came away. I looked about for Ned to say a parting word to him, but he was nowhere to be seen. As we left the door, we perceived, some 50 yards in advance of us, a gathering of men and boys. As we advanced, The circle broke to allow us to pass on the pavement, and we beheld in the air the identical legs that were protruded from the coffin, and Ned's body, pinning to the pavement a boy half as large again as himself, whom he was belaboring with lusty blows and crying between them, "I'll teach you to call me mammy a thief. She a thief, my mammy, that never stole from an enemy, let alone a friend. She's gone to the good God, and if you spake the word again, it's I will be sending you howling to the other place." "Ned," said I, and put my hand gently on him. The boy jumped as if he were electrified and sprang to my side. "Sure, ma'am, and I could not help it," he said, in answer to my remonstrance upon his ill-timed resentment. "The devil a bit would I be after fighting when me mammy was a burying. It was just to convince him my mammy never touched that dirty candlestick." A suspicion flashed across my mind. "What candlestick, Ned?" I asked. "Sure, ma'am," answered Ned, drawing close to me and lowering his voice. "He's be such a friend to us, I'll tell you the truth. It was that woman that lives next door to you with the black flashing eyes. It was she called me mother a thief. And Tim Potts that goes of dirty errands for her waiter got the story there. She might have had a candlestick to this day, but she was after shutting the door in me mammy's face when she was that weak like. Her legs trembled under her. And just for a bad compliment, I took her dirty candlestick and threw it to the pigs. And ye may see for yourself, ma'am, they champed it out of shape and it was all unbeknownst to me mammy. And would you wish me to hear her lying dead there called a thief for the dirty thing?" Before I could reply, the hearse appearing in sight brought a fresh shower from Ned's eyes, and I deferred examining the candlestick and enlightening Ned's conscience to a future opportunity, and returned to my home, meditating on the singular characteristics commingled in the Irish race. Since every wind that blows brings to our shores a fresh swarm of these people who are to form so potent an element in our future national character, it behooves us to study them well and make the best we can of them. And a rich study they are, with their gutsy passions and unwavering faith, their susceptibility to kindness and their prejudices, their utter incapacity for verbal truth and the overruling truth of their affections, their quick and savage resentments and their fervid gratitude, their barbarous ignorance and their brilliant imaginativeness, and their bee-like diligence and their brutish filth. These opposing qualities, with the richness and confusion of their ideas, make them an exquisite compound of poetry, inconsequence, wit, and blunder. Well, that certainly gives us a lot to think about. And so I do hope you write down your questions and comments. And please join us on April 8th when we will be holding a discussion and Q&A with Professor Elaine Showalter. And thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ann Haddad, and I look forward to seeing you for our next story. Hello, everyone. My name is Annie Haddad, and I am the historian at the Merchants House Museum. It is my great pleasure, in honor of Women's History Month, to welcome you to our new series, Women Who Dared, 19th Century American Women Writers. In this series of short stories, we will explore how women writers of this period give voice to the pressing issues that were facing women by pulling back the curtains that shrouded their lives to reveal the harsh realities of life in the home and in American society. Defying convention by invading the traditional masculine domain of literature, these writers use their narratives to lay bare the pervasive marginalization of women who were restricted by what was called the cult of true womanhood, of which the prized virtues were piety, submissiveness, domesticity, and purity. They also boldly raised questions about racism and prejudice within the society. While being told to suffer in silence and given constant reminders of their imposed inferiority, many women felt trapped and unfulfilled and hungered for recognition of their plight. As a result, these female writers were critical and commercial successes, despite the largely dismissive attitude of writers and critics. For example, in 1855, a resentful Nathanial Hawthorne wrote to his publisher, "America is now wholly given over to a damned mob of scribbling women, and I should have no chance of success while the public is occupied with their trash." Many of these innovative feminist-themed stories appeared in the popular periodicals of the day, such as Godey's Lady's Book, Peterson's, and the Atlantic Monthly, and in popular gift books and literary annuals, where they were probably read by the Treadwell women who occupied the home on 4th Street that today we know as the Merchant's House Museum. Since the letters in the museum archives provide little information about the inner lives of Eliza Treadwell and her 6 daughters, we may read these stories and wonder whether or not they shared the experiences and thoughts expressed within them. Now, after being largely excluded from the American literary canon for a large part of the 20th century, the rise of women's studies programs and attention to feminist literature led to a renewed appreciation of these authors and their works. The renowned literary and feminist scholar Elaine Showalter edited 2 of the anthologies from which my story selection was taken. I am thrilled to inform you that on April 8th, Dr. Showalter, Professor Emeritus of Princeton University, will be joining us for a virtual discussion and Q&A. Dr. Showalter has written extensively on the short story form as a tool by which women writers could express the circumstances of women's lives. Her expert insights will surely enliven our discussion, so I do hope you join us for that event. Now, you probably have not heard of most of the writers in this series. In that case, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to them. Before we begin our first story, I would like to recite one stanza of a poem by Anne Bradstreet titled Prologue. Considered to be one of the most important early American poets, Bradstreet was the first writer to be published in the North American colonies. A mother of 8, she wrote many poems that addressed her domesticity, her Puritan faith, and her struggles to remain committed to her writing despite the confining role she was assigned to by virtue of her sex. In Prologue, written in 1650, Bradstreet reflects with a mixture of anger and sarcasm on how society rejects the idea that a woman may have creative impulses. I am obnoxious to each carping tongue who says my hand a needle better fits. A poet's pen all scorn I should thus wrong. For such despite they cast on female wits. If I do prove well, it won't advance. They'll say it's stolen, or else it was by chance.